All right, chapter 1, section 4b is solving quadratic equations using completing the square. This is just another way to solve a quadratic. You can also use quadratic formula, factoring, that sort of a thing. This will not be on your quiz. You'll have homework on this over the weekend. That is due on Tuesday, so you'll be able to get part of it done this weekend if you want to. We're going to finish things up on Monday, and then we'll pick back up with the rest of the sections next week. All right, when you're completing the square, these are the step-by-step instructions on what to do. All right, you want to keep the x squared and the x term on the left side of the equal sign. Move your constant to the right side. I am going to show you how to do all this if you have never seen it before, or this is a review. If there's a number attached to the x squared, you're going to factor it out. We're going to hit that on Monday, not today. You're going to find your c term by dividing b over 2. Then you're going to add to the left and right side that same number to balance it out. Then you're going to factor into a perfect square trinomial and solve. Okay, let me show you exactly what that is. Here is a quadratic. The first thing we always try and do is factor. Okay, if this one doesn't factor, so that's why you have to use completing the square. Or does it factor? Factors of 14. Multiply to give you 14, add to give you 4? No. Okay, so you got to complete the square. The ones that we're going to deal with today, your a term is 1. The number in front of x squared is 1. Okay, so this is your a term, just so we are all on the same page with terminology. This is your a term. This is your b term. And this is your c term, correct? When you complete the square, I'm actually going to draw a square, and you guys are going to see what we're talking about. And we're going to balance. You want to balance the left side and the right side. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our... All right, the first thing we want to do, if we're going to complete the square, you want to take your constant and you want to move it over all the time. Just do that first. So you have x squared minus 4x, and I'm going to put plus a box. And when I move 14 over, negative 14, it becomes what? Positive 14. Then I'm going to put another box. Because what you do to one side of an equation, you do where? To the other, okay? So when we complete the square, we're going to put the number in the square, literally. So you're going to take your b term. All right, since our a term is 1, the number in front of x squared is 1. We're good. This is what we're going to do all day today. We're going to take our b term, which is negative 4. We're going to divide it by 2. What does that give us? Negative 2. So my binomial on this side is going to have an x in the front and a minus 2 here, and we're going to square it. This is a pattern. It's going to happen every single time. I'll show you why this one time, and then we're just going to do the same thing. Now, what goes in the box right here is this term squared. What is negative 2 squared? 4. What you do to one side of the equal sign, you do where? To the other. This is always going to be plus. Why is that number always going to be plus? What are we doing to that number? We're squaring it. When you square any number, negative or positive, it stays what? Positive. So then I have equals, what's 14 plus 4? 18. And now we solve just like we did yesterday. Let's solve it, and then I'll show you in a second how this works. How do I get the squared to go away? We're going to take the square root, good. So I have x minus 2 equals what? What goes in front of 18? Plus or minus, good. And then one more thing I need to do. I'm going to add 2, yes, and then we're going to break down. So I have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 18. And then we say, can we break down the square root of 18? Into what? So 9 times 2, this becomes 3 root 2. So you have x equals 2 plus or minus 3 root 2. Those are your two x values. You would get the exact same thing if you used the quadratic formula. Now, let's look back at this for a second, at this step right here. If I have x minus 2 times x minus 2, and we FOIL that out, x squared minus 2x plus 4, yeah? X squared minus 4x plus 4. Is this what we got right there? Yes. Every time you complete the square, right, you make sure your a term is 1. If it's not, we'll deal with that on Monday. Then you take the b term. You divide it by 2. Whatever that result is, that's what goes in your parenthesis on the left-hand side. Then you square it. That's what goes in the box on either side. Every single time, we're going to do the exact same thing. So let's do this one. First of all, is my a term, the number in front of x squared, is it 1? Yes. All right, so we're going to move our constant to the other side. So this is going to give me x squared plus 6x plus a what? A box. Equals, when I move 1 over, negative 1, it becomes 1, and then I'm going to add another box. Because remember, what you do to one side of the equation, you do to the other. So let's take our b term, which is positive 6, and we divide it by 2, and it gives me what? 3. So there's your parenthesis right there on the left-hand side, your binomial. What kind of a 3 is it, positive or negative? So it's x plus 3. And then I square this number, and it becomes what? 9. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Perfect. So 9 plus 1 is 10. And then we go about solving. What do I do? Take the square root. What goes in front of my square root? Yep, so plus or minus root 10. And then the last thing? Subtract 3. Perfect. So I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. Can I break down square root of 10? No, just 2 and 5. That's not going to help us. You guys seen completing the square before? No? Okay. Yay, we finally got to something you haven't seen before. Is this so crazy hard? No, it's the same thing every time, all right? Is my a term 1? Yes, the number in front of x squared is 1. Perfect. So I have x squared plus 2x. What do I do with negative 5? I'm going to move it over. So I put a box on this side, and then I move my 5 over, put a box on this side. Always going to be plus because you're squaring that number. So take your b term. What is your b term? Positive 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. What kind of 1? Positive. So I have x plus 1 over here. Then when we square this number, it goes in the box. What's 1 squared? 1. So what you do to one side, you do to the good. So equals 6. Now we do the same thing all over again. How do I solve this? I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. Perfect. And the last step? Subtract 1 on both sides. So x equals negative 1 plus or minus root 6. Can you break down the square root of 6? No. Could I have written that as plus or minus root 6 minus 1? Yes. I just don't like the way that looks. Yeah. Yes, you can put it in front. Another question. I know on WebAssign it was asking you guys yesterday, like if you had to put in plus or minus. There's no plus or minus button, but if you read the directions, it says to put it in as a comma separated list. So just put the positive and then the negative. All right, moving along. We're going to do 2 more. Dos más. Do you think they're all going to be just super easy like the last few were? No, you silly gooses. But we're going to do the same thing, okay? This doesn't factor, so we're going to complete the square. So when we complete the square, or does it factor? Does it? Okay. If you guys, this is a good thing to come up to. If you guys have a test question and it says solve, does it matter how you find your answers? No. You can complete the square, you can solve by factoring, you can use a quadratic formula. But if the directions say solve by completing the square, and you get the answer, but you didn't find it by completing the square, did you follow the directions? No. So let's follow the directions like it says. If something factors, great. That's a good way for you to check. But if we are completing the square, then that's what we need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is say x squared plus 7x plus a what? Plus a box equals negative 12 plus what? Plus your box. Okay, we're going to do the exact same thing that we have been doing. We're going to take our b term, which is 7, and divide it by 2. Is that pretty? Huh? No, but that's okay. That is okay. What does my parenthesis over here look like? X plus what? 7 over 2 what? Squared. Okay. When I square this, it's going to go in this box. What does that become? What's 7 over 2 squared? 7 squared is? 49 over 4. Okay, so what you do to one side, you do to the other. You guys agree? Okay. So equal. So I have to add these two together. Do we know how to add fractions? We sure do. Guys, if I was going to change 12 over 1 into fourths, what would I multiply by? 4. So I have to multiply the bottom by 4, then I multiply the top by 4. What's 12 times 4?
64.
Is it? Okay, so negative 48 over 4 plus 49 over 4, which would be what? 1 over 4. Good. All right, was that the greatest thing in the world? No. Was it the worst? No. Now what? Okay, we're going to take the square root of both sides. We have not changed our pattern of anything. We're doing the exact same thing. So when I take the square root of both sides, I have x plus 7 over 2 equals, what goes in front of my answer? Plus or minus. So think of this, guys. This is the square root of 1 over the square root of 4, which is what? 1 over 2. Okay. Everybody with me? And then what's my next step? I want x by itself. I'm going to subtract 7 over 2. So minus 7 over 2. Guys, when you get to this point, I have x equals plus or minus 1/2 minus 7 over 2. Do not leave that. This is two answers here. This is positive 1/2 minus 7/2. And this is negative 1/2 minus 7/2. Simplify that, guys. What's 1/2 minus 7/2? Negative 6/2, which is what number? Negative 3. Negative 1/2 minus 7/2 is negative 8/2, which is what? Negative 4. Now, like I said at the beginning, what would have been easier to do here? Factor it, right? What are the factors of 12 that multiply to give you 12 and add to give you 7? X plus 3, x plus 4. Is that the same answer that we got, negative 3, negative 4? Yeah. Right, if we solve here, we get x equals negative 3 and we get x equals negative 4. So if the directions say solve on your test, when you guys have it next week, solve the equation. Doesn't matter how. If your WebAssign says solve by completing the square, if you're doing the WebAssign for completing the square, use completing the square. 90% of the time when you're given a completing the square problem on a test or a quiz, it doesn't work out nice and pretty like this. There's a reason that we have to use completing the square. But understand that this is the same, you can find the same answer several different ways. This is just another way to do it. Questions? Let's do one more. All right, let's look at this problem. The rest of them are a little different, so we're going to pick it back up on Monday. But is your A term 1? Is the number in front of x squared 1? Yes. Okay, we're good. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get this negative 6 to move over here. So I have x squared minus 3x plus my box equals, when I move negative 6 over, what does it become? It becomes positive 6, and then plus the other box, correct? Yeah, when you go from one side of the equal sign to the other, the signs change. How would you get negative 6 to move over? You have to add it. So let's take our b term. What is my b term? It is negative 3. We're going to divide it by 2. Does that divide pretty? No. So my parenthesis over here is just x minus 3 over 2 squared. Equals, well, we have to square this number and put it right there in that box. What does negative 3 have squared? 9/4. Good. So we're going to add 9/4 to both sides. Okay, so I have 6 over 1 plus 9/4. Can I somehow simplify this? What would your common denominator be here? 4. So if I multiply the bottom here by 4, I multiply the top by 4. What's 6 times 4? All right, so I come out with 24 plus 9 over 4. What's 24 plus 9? 33. So 33 over 4. Okay. Now what? Take the square root. Perfect. When you take the square root, what goes in front of your answer? Okay, great. So I have plus or minus. Now think about this, guys. You can break this up. This is the square root of 33 over the square root of 4. Do either one of those simplify? Which one? The bottom, right? So it's the square root of 33 over what? 2, okay. And then what's your last step? plus 3 over 2. Perfect. So plus 3 over 2. So x equals, this is very different ways you can write the same thing. This is 3 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 33 over 2. Could I write it plus minus square root of 33 over 2 plus 3 over 2? Yes. Could I write x equals 3 plus or minus root 33 over 2? Can I do that? Yeah, same thing. These are the same things. That's fine. But understand, the purpose of completing the square is because something doesn't factor and you don't want to use the quadratic formula. If something factors, obviously that is the way to go. That's the easiest thing to do. Yes, ma'am?
Why did you divide 6 by 4?
I didn't. I had 6 over 1. Whoops, that doesn't look like 6.
Oh,
I had 6 over 1, and I changed it to fourth. So I multiplied the bottom by 4 and then the top by 4. That's where I got 24. Yeah, that's our next section. Yeah. Okay, we're good? All right.